Hello, everyone. This is Tyler Esselman.
And I'm Michael Osinski.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
It's This One Goes to 11. It's your favorite podcast, right? We're totally your favorites.
Or at least your dad's.
Well, yeah, there's that. Because obviously we're the only ones out there who are inviting people on to talk to us about, I don't know, maybe an album, a musical album that they think is pretty darn perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
So true. It's a consistent formula that we have adopted, and we are going to stick with it because that is the conceit of our podcast.
And that is the reason why.
Oh, man.
This week we have somebody coming on that is very knowledgeable, very experienced in this field of music and music discourse. I felt very, it's a little bit of the imposter syndrome kicking in. I was a little starstruck. We have a guy named Matt Melis on this week, don't we, Michael?
We sure do. Tell us about him.
Matt Melis is a writer, publisher, and part-time literature professor from Pittsburgh. He now lives in Chicago. He co-owns the online pop culture publication Consequence, where he spent nearly 15 years as the site's editorial director and maintained 3 long-running columns. He's currently working on a debut novel and a book about one of his favorite albums. What did we say? What did we say? He's qualified. Mm-hmm. And when not writing or helping others write, he works with dogs and hangs out at home with his girlfriend Samantha, brown tabby Lucky Cat, and black lab mix Leopold Bloom. He's good at naming things.
Yes. Our listeners might remember Leopold Bloom from last season, because we did hear Leopold Bloom did make an appearance during one of our episodes, the episode on the Arcade Fire album. So
yes,
there's that.
With Miss Samantha Lopez.
Mm-hmm.
Bless her.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I did not expect to get the little... I mean, listeners, if you've ever been a fan of the year-end list, like the top, however many albums of any given year, and essentially like how as you were saying, Tyler, the proverbial sausage gets made with that, like you get to see a little bit of sausage in this episode. Just want to put that out there.
And it's an auditory medium, so don't be worried. Don't be worried. You get to hear a little bit of sausage.
That's true. I should have said that. Hear some sausage. Yeah. All right. Well, let's. Now we're all hungry, so let's get to the episode.
All right. Let's do it. Matt Melis, welcome to This One Goes to 11. How are you, sir?
Very well. My pleasure to be here.
We are very excited to have you. It is good to have so much Chicago representation on this podcast because it makes me feel like I'm almost there. I can taste it. I can taste fall in Chicago through the Zoom screen. It's a gift to me.
You could taste that 80-degree global warming fall weather in Chicago that we're having today. So.
It's an identity crisis, as pretty much everybody in Chicago has told us.
Yep, absolutely. But we'll take it while we can.
Absolutely.
Also, our second music journalist on the podcast, which is very exciting.
It's good to have you here as us faux music journalists, or us very green music journalists. We need experience through osmosis from you all.
Oh, everyone loves critics. If there's one thing I know, everyone just is in love with us. Do I know the other journalist by chance?
I think you might be somewhat familiar with her.
Yeah.
I think
Sam
I have
Lopez
to
ring a bell. Sam Lopez.
It better ring a bell. I have to pick her up from a party tonight. That's the girlfriend. So
yeah, you better.
Believe it or not.
But you threw us some curveballs. What that gives a perfect segue to present to us what album hath thou brought before the This One Goes to 11 tribunal today?
I've brought to you guys Townes Van Zandt live at the Old Quarter, Houston, Texas. And I think your listeners maybe have heard of Townes Van Zandt, but I wanted to bring you guys something that they might not have listened to. So I was trying to throw you a little bit of a curveball, and maybe it's even new to you guys too. So that's always fun.
Well, the funny thing is that country, we're going to talk about genre plenty, I'm sure. Yeah. But do you consider Townes Van Zandt to be country or folk, or like where does Townes exist in that spectrum to you?
Sure, yeah, we'll talk more about that for sure. But I think you could call it folk, you could call it country. He's borrowing from a lot of different genres. From you could think Woody Guthrie, you can think Lightning Hopkins and the blues. Very unique to sort of that Texas area. A lot of what he does, but he's also you hear Bob Dylan in him as well. And one thing I would stress. I'm not a country fan. I'm not necessarily a huge folk fan, and I listen to nothing else that sounds like Townes Van Zandt. I listen to nothing else that even falls anywhere near that genre-wise, to be honest. So I just say that to stress that your listeners, they hear country, they hear Western music, they hear folk, and they say, "Oh, that couldn't be for me." This guy, in my opinion, has a little bit of something for everyone. So you don't have to be a country fan to kind of dig in here and find something you dig.
I love that. Yes. Okay. If we were already giving points, then I would give points. But I think before this is another great segue. Man, you're good at this, Matt. You are really, you're a natural.
It's like he writes about music or something.
And has for a decent portion of his life.
I used to. In another life, it seems. Yeah.
This gives us an opportunity to introduce. People tell us it's everyone's favorite segment. They just love this. They love this thing that we do. Yeah. What is this thing that we do, Michael?
This thing that we do, it's called The Beginner's Guide to Townes Van Zandt's live at the Old Quarter, Houston, Texas, in 60 seconds, where basically we give our listeners a chance, in case they don't know who Townes Van Zandt is, to learn a little bit more about who he is and what this album's all about. And Tyler is going to make that presentation for our listeners today. Yeah. And then you, Matt, will have the opportunity to evaluate how well he does. So before we start giving you points, you get to give us points. We, give you a little bit of power before we take it away from you. So that's how
sounds good. Let's hear it.
I'm going to be honest. This one is more just Townes than it is the album, but this is a worthy writing challenge, and I relish your feedback.
And just so you know, not only am I a music critic, or I have been in the past, I'm also a literature professor. So I have my little writing instructor, so my little red pen, and we can go through this line by line if we have to. Let's go. We'll go through this. No pressure.
Tyler likes feedback. You're making his day right now.
we can grade on a curve if we have to. So we got to do. Go for it.
All right, you ready, Tyler?
Yep.
All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
You've probably heard the name Townes Van Zandt, and you've almost certainly heard a tune or two of his, not necessarily played by him, that is. The sort of the windswept ephemerality fits just right for this great bard of Texas. Born in 1944 to a prominent Fort Worth family, Van Zandt cut his musical teeth wandering the countryside, plucking at the guitar his father gave him as a Christmas present. The first signs of the demons of addiction and depression that would remain constant companions throughout his life surfaced while in college in Colorado. He received 3 months of insulin shock therapy as an attempted treatment that proved largely unsuccessful. And when his father died in 1966, he left school for good and hit the road to make music and his way like so many of his musical heroes before him. Artists like Lightning Hopkins, Hank Williams, and of course, Bob Dylan. Celebrated for his whiskey-soaked melancholy lyrics and lilting guitar. He's probably your favorite songwriter's favorite songwriter. Van Zandt passed in an untimely fashion in 1997 from the effects of substance abuse, but his ghostly melodies float through most of the best country music and folk music we all know and love today.
All right.
With 1 second to spare, no less. I'm impressed.
I will say we record these things out of order, so I won't say which episode I really ruined. I really ruined my attempt at a 60-second intro, but the one we most recently did, I just absolutely failed. So I'm just glad I got through 60 seconds and finished what I had to say today.
So Matt, what do you think of Tyler's job? How do you rate it using whatever scale you choose to use?
He stole my thunder. I don't even need to be here. That's about as good as it gets, right? So you guys, I'll let you talk for the next hour, and thank you for having me. I think you did pretty well, Tyler. And it's an hour and a half album, so you not only got his whole career in there more or less, but you got an hour and a half at the Old Quarter in there too. But I give it the highest marks I can give. You got the fact that where he's coming from and his influences. The guy had a really, really hard life from the get-go, and that really it really shows up in the music. And then sort of the truth that leaks out of it. So I think he captured that. And also the idea that we're talking about him today because other people heard him and they recorded his songs, or they picked up a guitar. It's like that old story with, what am I thinking of? It's the old cliche of, everyone heard the Velvet Underground and they maybe didn't buy the album, but they started a band. And there's a lot of people that picked up guitar because of this guy, or picked up, started listening to this type of music because of this guy.
Yeah, I want to pick up a guitar, and that's, you're going to be 30 next month, and I'm like, man, it's not too late. It's never too late is something that is coming through this. It's like everybody, it's the universal ability to just make a sound and mean it. Kind of.
He's got that type of sort of economical approach to songwriting that there's not and if you're a writer, you know how difficult that is to do. But when you hear it, there's a simplicity to it. Sometimes there's you almost think to yourself, hey, I could do that. That's, that doesn't seem to, but it's, the word choice and he understood that. I remember he said one time, when he's playing live, you can't play 5 blues songs in a row. You're going to lose them. You have to have some melody in there. You have to have some of those other types of songs. That's what they want to hear. So he kind of understood how to pack a lot, economically into a song that people wanted to listen to. And I think that's why you have such a captivated audience in this album, Live at the Old Quarter.
Oh yeah, and we will need to talk about the actual setting of this. But before we talk about the album itself, let's talk a little bit about you. The listeners will have heard a little bio that we gave in our intro before, but that you wrote for us lovingly. But we want to know a little bit about what your relationship with music is. It can be anything. It can be over the course of your life. It can be right now in your life. What role would you say music plays for you in your life right now?
Yeah, when I was thinking about that question, I thought back to something Tom Waits said when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He said something, I'm paraphrasing, I think. We all want to love music, but what we really want is for music to love us back. And you can interpret that 1,000 different ways. Sort of how I took that to mean was, or at least for myself, is sort of when you're listening to a song or an album and you get to those points or those moments where you say, I know exactly what's going on here. This could be about me. This song understands me. It's sort of that, if only for, maybe a verse or a chorus or a chord change, that song understands you. It gets you, the quotation marks around gets. And that's kind of how I've looked to music, at least as an adult. I've looked to it for comfort, for succor, but also just to not be alone. When you guys talk to Samantha Lopez, my girlfriend, who's as we said, is a great music journalist in her own right, she talked about how she uses music to express herself. I, on the other hand, I think I use music more so I don't have to be alone with those feelings. The head and the heart, they can be the lonely place. So to be able to listen to something that seems to understand where I'm coming from, whether it's being happy or whether it's being sad, as we look at some of these songs we'll talk about today, that's what it kind of does for me. So if you come around to my place and I have an album spinning and you see me drinking, I don't consider that drinking alone. If you come in at 10 a.m., there might still be a problem. Find me that way, but it's music is definitely a companion for me, for sure. 500
points for if an album is spinning, if I'm drinking, I'm not drinking alone. I love that.
There you go.
Yeah, I like what you say about that, like the fact that I feel like people who really love music, and it's almost like we're personifying the songs. Like that, it's not that the artists are singing to us; it's that the song is speaking to us. Did you ever play music at all growing up, or at any point, or has it mostly been you've appreciated as a listener?
I was the oldest cousin, oldest sibling. I had no one to pass down music to me. My parents didn't have the great record collection or anything, so we just heard what was on the radio. They played oldies, 94.5 3WS in Pittsburgh. So I got through there, but I had no one to pass down music to me. Don't have a musical family. I have zero talent. I have no business writing about music for a living. Absolutely no business whatsoever. Special skill set for doing that. So I kind of I just got there on my own. Yeah.
Really? So what were the main avenues of discovery then in your youth? Were you a record shop guy, or was it? I mean, so obviously we talked about the radio, and
Mm-hmm.
who were the artists you remember hearing on the radio?
Not till later was I a record shop guy. Again, we didn't even have a turntable around when I was growing up.
Okay.
I again listening to oldies. So it was Motown and R&B, Philly soul, all that sort of stuff. Anything you would have heard on from the 50s or 60s, maybe early 70s, you would have heard on an oldie station. That's what I was listening to until I was old enough to kind of get into radio dial wars with my family. But and then once I kind of in the 90s, when I started buying music on my own, it was just listening to whatever was on the radio, whatever was popular, the songs that were played like 3 times an hour. And I used to love listening. I'd leave the radio on at night and I would tape it. And then the next morning I would listen back to what was on that night in the hopes I would find maybe 1 or 2, new songs or something like that. So it was just a time where, critics were saying this is what you should listen to. The big record companies were saying this is what you should listen to. Every week we went down and bought the new records that were coming out. We were kind of spoon-fed it. We didn't have taste of our own. We hadn't developed any of that. And it was a wonderful time. Then I went off to college and I started, I found record stores and I started going backwards. So actually, I would have gone off to college in 2001. So from about 2001 till the time I started at Consequence of Sound, about 2007, 2008, I was actually going backwards and finding all that music, finding Ecstasy and the Pixies and finding Bob Dylan and finding The Clash and Tom Waits and all these older things. So the music discovery for me didn't start till I kind of went off on my own. Until then, I was just kind of listening to any alternative rock that was on the radio, anything my parents were playing in the car. I didn't develop any sort of thoughts on music of my own or taste until, really till college or late in high school.
You sound like it sounds like you were a truly blank slate, which is not typical of most of our guests. Most of our guests have this sort of like base of, this base of taste that has been developed. But it has to be, I think the first words you said of being the eldest cousin and and not having anybody to pass it down to, that's a kind of remarkable thing you don't hear from a lot of people.
Right. I mean, usually you get into music, you get into, say, like horror movies, there's things like that. You get into them because you have someone to show you that stuff.
Yeah.
Or a cool older friend, a cousin, a sibling, even a father who hasn't quite grown up, and he says, look at this stuff, check this out. Yeah. And I love my parents, but they did not bestow any of that sort of thing on me. So I was a blank slate. And what you do when you're a blank slate, you listen to whatever you're told to listen to, whatever you think was cool. So there will be a lot of times I go back to the 90s and I listen to a lot of the grunge music. I listened to, I listened to with Sam the other day, Green Day Dookie. Which came out in 94. And this was the first album or CD I bought for myself. And it was the coolest thing to have when you were in 4th grade. And I love listening back to it. And I have many times over the years. But I love listening back and saying, you know what? We got something right. That's an amazing friggin' album. So much of what I listen to now, what I listened to then does not hold up now. So
we were just talking about Dookie, weren't we, Michael? Didn't somebody else bring up Dookie
I can't remember
recently?
what episode it came up during, but yeah, Green Day's come up a few times this season, actually.
Sure.
I think we were talking about how it essentially sounds like punk that's been well produced. Like if you take punk music and make it more palatable for mainstream radio, that's what you have. I can't remember if our guest was talking about that in a negative way or a positive way, but like, hey, I like Green Day. I don't.
Yeah. Well, especially Dookie. I feel like that was sort of, you hate to say that it was the essential powerful Green Day as like them at the height of their powers, but I really kind of do feel like it was. Yeah,
and then, signing to a major label, putting out that album, I think it got them banned from their club back in California for a couple decades. So, they got there was the, good and the bad with that sort of thing. But, I can listen to that. I can listen to the stuff they did before that, purists, for the lack of a better word, would say this is the real Green Day. So I love it all. So
that's awesome.
Also got a real killer hidden track on that album. I remember that was like in high school, that was always the thing. Like
I was all by myself. Yeah,
exactly. And of course,
they could do that. Yeah.
And since I went to a Catholic school, that was always like we couldn't say what that song was about. Like it was always a big thing we weren't able to talk about. But well, so steering to something more specific, how did you discover this album? Was it a specific occasion? Was it something you listened to for a long time? Do you remember the moment that you first heard this album?
Absolutely, and to make a short story a little bit longer. Of all places I learned about, because I think you find Townes Van Zandt, first. If you can find Townes Van Zandt, you're ahead of the game, especially back 20 years ago. Now I think his name floats around a little bit more. He's been in so many movies, his music. The records have been reissued and made available. But really, when I was growing up, I never heard his name until, of all places, a Counting Crows bootleg. I was a bit of a Counting Crows fan. Again, I listened to everything that came out in the 90s.
This is a pro Counting Crows pod. Well, actually, I don't know. Am I speaking out of turn, Michael?
No. You're fine. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, this is a pro Counting Crows podcast. Just so everyone is clear. Everyone listening, just know.
So good to know. So around the turn of the century, during Jazz Fest, the lead singer, Adam Duritz, and some of the members of the band, they would do secret shows at a club called the Shim Sham Club. I believe it's been defunct for almost a couple decades now. And these shows are more excuses to go play a bunch of covers they wanted to play, bring up friends, bring up songwriters they loved. And as the night, much less a Counting Crows show, and as the nights would go on, they would become more and more drunken covers. And but from those, if you've ever get a chance to talk to Adam Duritz, the lead singer, the guy's a complete record head. He'll talk to you for hours and hours and hours, especially about the albums he grew up loving, especially in the 70s. So so from listening to those secret shows and the bootlegs we would get, I learned about Big Star, The Replacements, Jules Shear, Robin Hitchcock and the Egyptians, Soft Boys, Sparkle Horse. The list goes on, and Townes Van Zandt was one of those artists. I think it was their 2000 Shim Sham Club show. He played Poncho and Lefty, probably Townes Van Zandt's most famous song. And then later in the night, after he'd had a few more drinks, the place got real quiet. And he asked them, he said, I really want to play this song by this really beautiful songwriter. I've always wanted to try to sing this. And that song, and everyone stayed quiet, and that song was For the Sake of the Song. Mm-hmm. That's the title track, actually, off his debut. And I remember just listening to that, and, it's just one of those moments that I think we've all had where we hear something, and, we just say, oh, my God, what is that? And I don't think it was their performance or anything. It's almost like when you see a beautiful painting, you don't really care about the frame, what it looks like, or where it's hanging. It could be hanging in a museum. It could be hanging in your garage. You're listening and you're looking at that. And I just remember, I think it was just the way the words were coming out, the story, the strange phrasing that I hadn't heard before, where he doesn't really write to the phrase or to the end of the song line. He writes to the word. So you think a line's done, and then it kind of skips and it keeps going. The thought continues. And it was nothing I'd ever heard before. And I said, well, I have to figure out who the hell this guy is. And I think I went, and from there, I think the next day I went to the little record store at Purdue University, and I don't even remember what it was called this time. There was a little independent record store, and I picked up a greatest hits CD that had For the Sake of the Song and Poncho and Lefty on it. And from there, just kept trying to track down these CDs and albums. Again, there was a time where it wasn't super easy to find them. Yeah. It was even harder to find when they came out originally on records. He just got no promotion whatsoever. It was kind of on a label that didn't sink any money into it. So it was just years of sort of picking up bootlegs and records as I could find them. And eventually I found Live at the Old Quarter. And I think I used the word before, it's been a companion ever since. It's really a great sampling of sort of who he was as a songwriter and, what he was able to do when, he was in front of people with a guitar. So it's been something that's stuck with me, and I've turned to, time and time again.
Okay, you get 6,000 points for if you ever get the chance to talk to Adam Duritz, because that was a great thing. But it's just that was so what a situation in which to first hear one of his songs, because I feel like that also is the spirit that is carried in the album itself. That sort of intimacy, that the intimacy of the club and feeling it's so immersive in the way that. From the moment you hear the announcement, the like pre-show announcement, I think your introduction to him couldn't have been more fitting, in my opinion.
Something you had said earlier to Matt about like the simplicity of this. I mean, it's weird because I'll listen to these albums in preparation for the episode, and often I'm like exercising, and it's weird. It was weird to exercise to this album. I tried it briefly, but just because it's just so raw and simple and honest, it felt like he was right, like in my ears, like he was right there with me. Like it almost like it created. I could see him sitting in front of me performing, because there's no artifice or anything to. I mean, I don't know what the studio recordings of all this sounds like, because I try to like just listen to whatever the album is that we're covering, but it's just so. I mean, the only album I can think of that we've listened to thus far and that we've covered on the podcast that this is similar to me is like Joni Mitchell's Blue. Frankly, like it's just because of that simplicity and the raw honesty. And I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this after we listen to your track, but also I just feel like I can feel everything that he's going through without even seeing him or seeing what the performance is like. Like you can almost hear the turmoil and everything that he's wrestling with in the song, even though he never really says any of it outright, it seems like.
No, absolutely. And some of that I think is, the quality of the actual songwriting itself can seem simplistic. And then you sort of start looking at the rhyme schemes for some of these things. You realize, oh, geez, this guy's not writing your typical pop song or country song. The way he phrases things, the way he works with, again, melodies that aren't particularly complicated. But that's how you sometimes you package truth. It doesn't have to, it doesn't need all that artifice. It kind of stands on its own. And you spoke to Townes Van Zandt's recordings. And one of the reasons I really love this is a lot of his early recordings, I don't think his producers really, and I knew their names at one point. I don't want to call anyone out and get their name wrong or call it the wrong person, but I think they just didn't know what to do with them. And you'll hear, like, for example, For the Sake of the Song, which we'll talk about, and a number of other songs, they were just given this really, really sort of sometimes lush orchestration. All this other stuff was brought in, and they're, in some cases, I think they're unlistenable. And you'll see in later recordings, and obviously here, you get actually stripped down, more pared down versions of them. And I think he's, sometimes a backing band, sometimes accompaniment and some orchestration and some production really helps this guy. But I think he's at his strongest when he's just him, and a guitar. And, that's not to say that that's better, or worse than anything else. It's just to say that's, I think, when he's at his best. That's when he's at his most provocative. That's when I think he can really touch you with these songs. So that's one thing I love about Alive at Old Quarter. And some of these songs have really become, because of it's him at his finest. It's him without all sort of that production getting in the way. It's I think some of these versions are definitive versions for sure.
And you also, if you don't have the live album, you don't get the inner, the connective tissue of the banter on stage and the impression of who this guy is. I think probably it seems to me like if we're to understand that this guy lived his life on the road, this guy was a gigger. He was moving around, and he was really just like living an itinerant lifestyle like that. Really no frills. You can get that flavor from this recording very, very strongly. And the jokes are terrible, but they shouldn't be any better than that. They have to be it gives you a sense of who that guy is.
No, and it's something. Go ahead, Michael.
No, you go first.
Sure. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about Live at the Old Quarter. From the beginning, you get an announcement about, the air conditioning's not working. Sorry. The pool tables are upstairs. The foosball table's upstairs. The cigarette machines are upstairs. And I almost want to think back to if you guys ever saw the Blues Brothers, where they're in that country western where they play both types of music, country and western. They're at that bar, and there's chicken wire, and there's bottles being thrown at it. And I don't think the Old Quarter was quite like that, but it was a bar, it was a juke joint. I think there was about 100 people packed into this place 5 nights in a row, and it would usually be hustling and bustling and drinks clanging, and these people are absolutely captivated and hanging on every word. He even says, at some point, I've never heard it this quiet in here before. This is really cool. And then, of course, like you say, so that sets the scene for it. And then you hear him break out his sort of goofy jokes. So you get a sense of his sense of humor that you might not get from most of his songs. So, between the banter and that, you really get, I think, a little, I think, a very generous portion of who this guy is, because he was very nomadic. And when he wasn't a nomad, he was kind of a hermit, kind of left to his own demons and devices. So to get a moment where you kind of see who this guy is and in a fuller sense of it, it is sort of like a treasure trove here for sure. I think there's a couple of reasons when we speak to Townes Van Zandt a lot as a tragic story. In a lot of cases, he was. The shock therapy he went through in childhood, I think it tended to affect his long-term memory. So if you were to ask him about his youth, if you were to ask him things like that, a lot of that was kind of blanked out. But what is amazing is you can ask him about where he wrote a song and when he wrote a song and how he wrote it, and that comes back very quickly to him. So it's one of those cases where I almost think of it like someone who's suffering dementia or Alzheimer's, how sometimes music is a connection and something that they could sit down, they can't remember who they are or where they are. Not that I'm saying Townes Van Zandt was that case, but they can play a song on piano or a song takes them back to a place. So I think in terms of as a songwriter and everything, I think that never really affected him in that regard. What did end up affecting him was the booze and the heroin and those addictions. It hadn't really hit him yet. He was just starting to really drink hard the year this was recorded. So in subsequent years, he would really sort of disappear and fall into a lot of that addiction. All of a sudden, the albums started coming out, in a trickle as opposed to like 6 in 6 years. You hear his voice just ages 20 years and, a couple years. There's stories of him, if you guys have ever seen Heart-Worn Highways, it's a documentary came out many years ago, and it tried to capture some of these people in the Texas folk scene. I think Guy Clark's in it. Townes Van Zandt was in it. And you see him living just in this little trailer community out in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, how is this songwriter, kind of living in these squalid conditions, kind of, again, sort of this hermetic life style. And, I think his child even said, he shrank away from everything. He was shooting up heroin in front of children at times, so this was before all that. So not only here are you, you're not seeing that really interfere, but this is really kind of one of the last recordings where you kind of get him at the height of his powers before you really hear his voice shot and he started having problems. You could hear his finger picking goes. He's not nearly the guitar player a couple of years later that he was here. So it's not only a great collection, but it's kind of it's sort of a last chance to kind of hear him at his best, I think.
4,000 points for that. Last chance to hear him at his best. Good reason to listen to it.
So we asked you to identify your standout track from the album. So what track did you pick and why did you choose it?
I picked for the sake of the song. I picked it because what we're recording this on, a Sunday night. I picked because it was Sunday. And I say that to say if you ask me tomorrow, and that's not a cop-out, but
No.
one of the things about sort of Townes Van Zandt and an album like this too, there's 26 songs on it, I believe. And I think, and you could record, this was 5 nights in a row at this place. There's 26 songs here. You could do a completely different set list, another 26 songs, and you wouldn't feel cheated, I don't think. He's really got a song for every experience, every feeling, every emotion. There's some sort, I think of him almost like, I think of like a Chekhov writing short stories. There's some kernel of truth that comes out about so many aspects of life. And for the sake of the song, I don't know if I should air my dirty laundry, but me and my girlfriend, we were Samantha. We were talking about some things, and there was some communication breakdowns on some things. She'll love hearing about this. But, and that's a lot about what that song's about. There's sort of the desires of the girl in it to, for lack of a better term, to kind of sing her shit to this guy. And she's always doing so. And he's trying to sort of, figure out, why is she doing that? Why is she doing it to me, and what can I do to support her, and maybe this is just the way things are. So again, it sounds like a cop-out answer, but it was Sunday, but we were talking about relationships and how we work through things, and I thought of this song. And in addition to that, it's one of the best versions of this song I've ever heard. And again, it's him, it's his guitar, it's stripped down production. The first version of this song he ever recorded, I can't even listen to it. It's just so overproduced. So to hear something so pure, and as Michael was saying, so just raw and vulnerable, and just to feels true to life. This song always gets to me, and there's about 20 or 30 other Townes Van Zandt songs that always get to me too. But this was kind of my first falling in love with him, and I go back to it all the time.
Why don't we just listen to it?
That's the end of part 1. If you access this episode via our YouTube playlist, you're about to hear our guest's standout track. If you'd like to jump ahead to part 2, you'll find a link in the description of this episode.